Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Over the years, all manner of tall structures have popped up across London, from the Monument and Nelson's Column, to the London Eye, the Crystal Palace Transmitter, the Tredic Tower, and many more. There's one forgotten project from the 1890s though, which, had it been completed as planned, would have given the capital its very own version of the Eiffel Tower. Known as Watkins Tower, this mighty structure was intended to rise 1,175 feet, or 358 metres, above northwest London, which is even taller than the Shard. Quite impressive for the late 19th century, don't you think? Watkins Tower, or as it later became known, Watkins Folly, was named after the man who'd envisioned it, Sir Edward William Watkin. Born in Salford in 1819, Watkin was a visionary entrepreneur who rose to prominence during the 19th century railway boom, and over the course of his career he held senior roles in numerous railway companies, including the Metropolitan Railway, the world's first underground passenger line. Watkin was known for his grand ambitions. In the early 1880s, for instance, he initiated work on one of the earliest attempts at a Channel tunnel, and went so far as to have 2 pilot tunnels bored. This project was soon abandoned though, amid fears such a route could one day be exploited in the event of an invasion. Plus, it was reported Queen Victoria herself found the idea to be objectionable. This didn't stop Watkin from dreaming big though. In the late summer of 1889, by which point he was into his 70s, he visited the Paris exhibition with his friend, the politician William Gladstone, where they encountered the event's stunning centrepiece, the then brand new Eiffel Tower. Watkin was enamoured, and quickly deciding that London needed a similar tower of its own, he established the International Tower Construction Company to achieve that end. Initially, he thought about building the Great Tower of London, as it was called early on, at the Imperial Institute in South Kensington, which is now home to Imperial College, between the Royal Albert Hall and the Natural History Museum. In the end though, Watkin plumped for Wembley Park, an area that's now heavily built up, although in the late 19th century it's lay in what was then rural Middlesex, the park itself having been laid out in the 1790s by the celebrated landscape gardener Humphrey Repton. Watkin was already familiar with Wembley Park. Under his tutelage, the Metropolitan Railway had been extended from Willesden to Harrow in 1880, a project which necessitated the purchase of a tract of land running through the northern edge of the Wembley site. Then, at around the time he conceived his Great Tower, Watkin oversaw the purchase of a further 280 acres of Wembley Park for £32,929, about 3.5 million in today's money. Using this land, Watkin set out to create a pleasure park at Wembley, which was a canny business move, since most visitors would arrive via his Metropolitan Railway, Wembley being just a 12-minute journey from Baker Street. And of course, the jewel in Wembley Park's crown was set to be the Great Tower of London. When first contemplating building the tower, Watkin had offered the job to Gustave Eiffel himself, a fellow he considered to be truly a man of genius. The architect of the Eiffel Tower politely declined the offer though, his reason being he feared his fellow countrymen may feel he was not as good a Frenchman as I hope I am, were he to create an even taller landmark for Britain. Therefore, the design for the tower that was to stand at Wembley was thrown open to a competition, which was announced in the autumn of 1889. Entrants were invited to draft a design of not less than 1,200 feet, in other words, taller than the Eiffel Tower, which would be resistant to wind and sudden storms. The winner would receive the handsome sum of 500 guineas, plus of course, in theory, they'd get to see their vision built. In all, 68 designs were submitted from across the world, and thanks to the marvellous Internet Archive site, it's possible to browse the original catalogue which showcased them all online. When you delve deeper into the Victorian mindset, you come to realise that they could be a rather odd bunch. Their Christmas cards, for example, have to be seen to be believed, whilst this creepy creation, an uncanny head which could be animated using electrical currents, was one of the stars of the 1851 Great Exhibition. In keeping with this 19th century surreal streak, a good many of the designs for the Great Tower of London are also pretty out there. I'll select some of the most intriguing ones to show you now, but if you want to view all of them, I'll leave a link to the catalogue in the description below. This entry, design number 5, was drawn up by C. Belanger, an engineer who was based in Quebec. As you can see, it looks like a very tall wedding cake. It would have been 1,600 feet tall in fact, and lined with countless windows. Mr. Belanger claimed each section of his design could be unbolted and removed separately for other purposes. I imagine he was inspired in this by the 1851 Crystal Palace, which was dismantled and transferred from Hyde Park to Sydenham once the Great Exhibition had come to an end. Somewhat similar in shape is design number 6, drawn up by S. Fisher of Eagle Wharf Road, London. This one's pretty bombastic, for Fisher envisioned it as, quote, a national monument, in short, a monument of hieroglyphics emblematic of British history during Queen Victoria's reign. He also said his design would have a locomotive engine and train running halfway up the steep gradient, so it probably wouldn't have been ideal for those lacking a head for heights. In my opinion, design number 9, dubbed Multum in Parvo, meaning much in little, by R. Nettle of Redruth in Cornwall, is, well, the scariest. To me, this looks like some kind of dystopian monolith, the sort of thing you'd see in the 1982 film Blade Runner. What do you think? Known, rather cutely, as My Tower, design number 10 by F. Wilkins of Poland Street, Soho, is curious in that it resembles a very early version of the Shard. In fact, had it been built, it would have been even taller, 1,234 feet, compared to the Shard's 1,016 feet. Like the Shard, Wilkins said his tower would include residential flats and private offices, along with scientific institutions and all other measures tending to civilise and educate the human race. Quite a claim that, isn't it? Rather more ominously, he also said his tower could, in case of war, be used for signalling. Design 17 by J. Horton of Halifax is very peculiar indeed, for it resembles a screw. This tower would have been made from corrugated steel, around which would be a spiral promenade, enabling visitors to walk up and down its entire height. That's quite a climb, so if you didn't fancy that, there was to be a second track too, along which tram cars would ride, and inside, a telescopic lift, which in a way sounds similar to the viewing platform now used in one of Battersea Power Station's chimneys. Maybe Mr. Horton was ahead of his time. The only way I can find to describe design number 18 by J.H.M. Harrison Vasey of Sunderland is that, well, it looks like the Eiffel Tower on steroids. This tower also offered one of the most bizarre features seen in the contest, a, quote, captive parachute to hold 4 persons led in guides, which would have been fitted into one of the corner towers and regulated by a brake. Not sure I'd have fancied to go on that, if I'm honest. The man behind design number 29 had a very familiar name, Albert Brunel of Rouen, although he does not appear to have been a direct relation to the genius engineers Mark and Isambard Kingdom Brunel. As for his design, it was to be built from granite, hence the high price tag, £1,104,325, about 122 million in today's money. And it was inspired by the Leaning Tower of Pisa, only without the lean. Perhaps the most futuristic design is this one, number 44, labelled Ad Coelum Jesuris Ibit. If you command, he will go to the sky, which was created by an architectural firm based in Westminster. This design, which features a slim central tower held firm by wire ropes, bears a passing resemblance to the famous Skylon sculpture, which would be displayed years later on the South Bank at the 1951 Festival of Britain. I'd say design number 65 is, by far, the most bizarre of the lot, and that's saying something. Drawn up by Edwin Roundtor of Helensburgh, this to me looks like something out of a 1950s science fiction film. Edwin was more grounded in his description though, saying his tower may be considered as a great tree, hollow centrally, with roots well fixed down to iron beams in solid concrete. In the end, the competition's second prize went to John Webster and T.W. Haig of Liverpool, who came up with this design. Whilst the first prize was awarded to A.D. Stewart, J.M. McLaren and W. Dunn, a group of London-based architects whose design, number 37, was a 1,200 foot tall tower, not dissimilar to the Eiffel Tower, although they said the style adopted was of Oriental character. Their design, which came to be known as Watkins Tower, was set to contain a large central hall, viewing platforms, a Turkish bath, and a 90-bedroom hotel. Once the design had been chosen, the task of bringing the tower to fruition was given to Benjamin Baker, an experienced engineer who had worked on an array of projects, including construction of both the Metropolitan Railway and the Forth Railway Bridge. He had even designed the special container, which in 1877 was used to transport Cleopatra's Needle from Egypt to London's Victoria Embankment. The firm given the contract to build the tower were Heenan and Froude of Manchester, who was certainly more than capable, for this was the same company who, at around the same time, were also building the Blackpool Tower. The Great Tower of London's foundations were laid at Wembley Park in 1892, at the very spot, as shown on this map, which is now occupied by Wembley Stadium. At first, it was hoped Watkins Tower would be completed in time for the unveiling of the Wembley Park complex, which occurred in 1894. This was wildly optimistic though, and when the park, with its pleasure garden, sports pitches, tea pagodas and boating lake, opened its doors to the public, the tower had barely gotten off the ground, meaning in terms of what should have been the centrepiece, all visitors could see was a large building site. The main reason for the delay was funding. Unlike the Eiffel Tower, which had received cash from the French government, Watkins Tower was backed purely by private investors, and unfortunately, that support was slow to trickle in. By 1896, the first stage of the tower was complete, and so, as a means of generating income to fund the rest of its construction, this section was open to the public, who could pay to take a ride up in the lift. Even at this low height, the views were said to be impressive, with both Windsor Castle to the west and Crystal Palace towards the south being clearly visible. However, although Wembley Park itself had become a popular destination, the fledgling tower was not, with only 20% of visitors opting to pay for a look. Along with the financial insecurity, there was a bigger problem. The land at Wembley is considerably marshy, and before long, the tower, not helped by the fact that it only had 4 legs, which was fewer than the original design, was showing signs of subsidence. Worse was to come in 1901, when Sir Edward Watkin passed away, his death taking whatever enthusiasm remained for the project with it. And by 1902, the lifts were found to be dangerous, meaning the section which had been open to the public was now closed off. The tower briefly found itself of use in 1906, when an inventor from Pimlico named Edgar Wilson used it to test an early model of airship. But by the following year, the sorry eyesore, now dubbed Watkins Folly, had been completely demolished using dynamite. Despite his vision's sad demise, it must be said that Sir Edward Watkin did succeed in putting Wembley on the map. And the suburb gained further prominence in 1924, when Wembley Park was chosen to host a large British Empire exhibition. As part of that expo, a national sports ground, the now world-famous Wembley Stadium, was built, right on, as we saw earlier, the spot once penciled in for Watkins Tower. In fact, when the stadium was completely rebuilt at the start of the 21st century, remains of the foundations from Watkins Tower were unearthed. Today, the second incarnation of Wembley Stadium is marked by its huge tilted arch, which can be seen from various high points across London. And although nowhere near as tall as the tower he'd hoped for, it's nice to think that, in some way, Sir Edward Watkin did get his Wembley landmark after all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at London's failed Eiffel Tower, and as always, I'd love to hear your own thoughts. Out of the crazy designs we saw, which would you have chosen? Please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Robslondon, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus, of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.